Whew. What a week in both crypto and stocks, as we've seen some major bloodshed that we haven't had in a very long time. Now, as far as this week, we do have a few big events that are coming up that should impact the prices. So I want to go ahead and talk about those events, what they are, how they impact potentially stocks and crypto. And then I want to go ahead and look at the Bitcoin chart, my thoughts on it currently, and just really get some clarity with some charts here. I know as each and every week, I do like to give updates in videos. I've been in crypto for a long time and trading and investing in general for about a decade. And I like to give weekly updates. You can follow me on Twitter over at Rager. I've got over 200,000 followers. Make sure that you subscribe, and let's go ahead and talk about what's going on this week. So if you go ahead and look here on the screen, I've got info on the top 3 economic events that could impact the cryptocurrency market and just the stock markets in general. And the first thing that's going to come out is actually this Wednesday. And so that's the FOMC minutes. And as typically what happens with that is the Federal Reserve. And so these are the minutes that the Fed has for the March meeting. And this is where we get the real talk with what the Fed actually discussed behind the scenes. And so if it sounds hawkish, if they go in and talk about inflation, worried about the tariffs, and how potentially they're not willing to cut rates at the moment, then we could actually potentially see some bearish downtrends or pullbacks continuously with both stocks and crypto. And if it's neutral, if Powell lines up and really just remains calm as he has been over the past few weeks, then it's probably going to be good overall for the markets to see somewhat of a potential bounce there. Overall, the good thing about stocks before we get into the next big event is that it hit a key area. Now, the previous all-time high, it bounced there. That was a perfect opportunity to buy in. Individual or in the stock index, perfect hit right on the line there as far as the previous all-time high. That was a great bounce. Now, Bitcoin as well dropped down around $75,000. And so even below that, 74,000, which was just right above the key buy zone of the previous all-time highs as well. But where I'm getting to is that both Bitcoin and stocks have dropped dramatically over the past week. And I don't necessarily foresee them dropping harder, or if they do pull back, a slight pullback with hopefully a potential bounce. Right now, after all the blood that was shed, after all the red, I'm not really foreseeing both Bitcoin, crypto, and stocks to continue that downtrend. Hopefully, we see, even though stocks opened up higher, it really depends on the FOMC minutes. But as we know, things change day to day so fast, so quickly that it's hard to take into account what they said over the past month, because again, really what matters is today. So many things are changing dramatically with the stock market and with tariffs and with jobs that you got to take it day to day. So I don't think that Wednesday will be too much of an impact overall, but initially there seems to always be a reaction from the markets. We'll see tomorrow what that brings, or on Wednesday. If it's Thursday, what you're looking at is jobless claims. That's currently what we're going to see. Of course, with the expectations are around, I think 215,000 initial claims is what we're going to look for. If the number comes in higher, it could be a signal of weakness, right? Which weirdly might actually be bullish for markets. A weaker labor market gives the Fed more reason to cut rates. So in the end, as they cut rates, more liquidity, more money comes in, more money goes into risk assets, which pumps stocks, pumps crypto, pumps Bitcoin, and that's a positive overall. So that is on Thursday. The next big event is also on Thursday. If you're watching this on Thursday, understand that CPI is going to have a massive impact overall with inflation data. So this is the biggest event of the week, the Consumer Price Index. That's why we call it CPI. And it measures how fast prices are rising across the economy. Again, looking back to the previous CPI, last month we saw a CPI of 2.8. And so if you look on the chart here at Trade Economics, you can see the United States inflation rate. You can see for the different months. Now, Of course, this is for last month. Anytime CPI comes out, it's data from the past. So we saw 2.8% the month before. The consensus is 2.6%. That's what we want to watch for. If it goes above 2.6%, that's a hot print. Less likely for the Fed to cut rates in the coming month or so. If it comes in colder, that's really good because we already had 2.8%, which shows that inflation is dropping. Now, a big thing about inflation is that everybody's worried about inflation, but if you look at Truflation data, which is up to date to the minute, real Truflation US inflation index, and that's at 1.4%. Okay, so again, people are forecasting inflation to go much higher, but overall, since January, we've seen inflation drop from 3% down to as low as 1.22%. Inflation is low at the moment, is what I'm trying to get to. So I do think that the numbers will likely come in lower, which is a good thing overall when it comes to cutting those rates. So look at the Truflation data. If you have not yet checked that out, you can go to truflation.com. You can go to the marketplace, US inflation rate. Go ahead and click through there and see the 1 year change for inflation, and that is down. So those are the three big events: inflation, CPI on Thursday, jobless data as far as the claims, and then the FOMC minutes, which I don't think is going to have as much of an impact on Thursday. So Thursday should be a big day if you're watching this. Now, overall, what do I think about the market? I told you earlier, because stocks have bounced quite a bit since that dropped down to the previous all-time high. But if you go to Bitcoin and you go to crypto, and of course, there's the color red, right? We don't like the color red when it comes to charts, but that is just the reality of things. But overall, it's not bad. Now, yes, are we in a downtrend? This is the daily chart. Lower highs, lower lows. But there is really good hope that if the data comes out this week and the jobless claims are a good thing as far as maybe potentially higher or as expected, and CPI is lower, then that could be a short-term boost overall for the market. Because what I believe, and what I've said before in videos, and I'll continue to say now, great buy zone. Bitcoin is down 30% from the all-time high months ago. This is a rare buying opportunity. And the problem is that most people get fearful, they get scared. They don't want to risk on because, well, price could drop lower. And the problem is that most people tend to get in these levels up here between 92K to 100K and over 100K because they say, oh, 100K is now broken. Now maybe it goes to 200 or 300K, when really it was a distribution level since Bitcoin ran from 50K up to over 100K, over 2x over the course of 3 or 4 months there. And now you've got these pullbacks that are 30%, which are quite normal for Bitcoin. If you've been around, if you haven't lived under a rock and you've been following Bitcoin, trading and investing in Bitcoin for a long time, if you look at these bull markets, 30% pullbacks has been the norm. Even last bull market as well too. We didn't get as many of those, but from 2022, November, December, which was the bottom, 15K, all the way up to 100K, massive amounts of pullbacks in between. And now we're getting another pretty sweet pullback that hopefully sustains where it's at, but it's been in the buy zone, which was the previous all-time high, was at the top of the last range. And the only thing that I don't want to see is I don't want to see Bitcoin get down here and get below and get in this previous range and get stuck in there, because that is just a downtrend. It's a pure downtrend. And especially with what's coming up with rate cuts likely in June, you don't want to see price get stuck and go lower. What you want to do is you want to see price bounce, not necessarily V reverse quick, but you want to see price bounce, especially with the news that's coming up and the expectations, because the expectations are this is the CME FedWatch. And what this talks about is whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to cut rates. And you want them to cut rates if you are in risk assets, stocks, Bitcoin, and crypto. Now, What this tells you is the potential, what is probability of the Fed cutting rates in May. Now, previously this past week, it was around 14%. Currently, they're thinking around a 25 basis point cut is around 30% chances, okay? Which is double what it was before, but that's not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for is June. That's the time that we're looking for. And in June, currently, right now, there's only around a 5% chance of rates to stay the exact same, meaning that there is a 95% probability, at least at the moment, that the Fed is going to cut rates in June. 95% chance with 65% probability of around 25 point BPS basis points. And then there is around 50 basis points, 30%. So you've got around 95% total, which understand that the price of the stock market, of the crypto market, of Bitcoin likely goes up, not during these cuts, but if the probability is true, then the markets are going to bounce prior, meaning that you want to be in the market prior to June. So, for me, I do think that local bottom here, and if it's not a local bottom, I do think that, didn't mean to click that. We're not going to 50K, but I do think that if this can hold, looking at the 4-hour chart here, right, we saw the bounce, and I think it's normal for a price to come back down 75, 76K, as long as we don't see lower lows. But really, I think that's going to really be dependent on a few different things. Again, CPI this week, what do those numbers say? What is the Fed? How are they looking at things? Are they at least talking about potentially pivoting? Tariffs, how that's going? Are those going to scale back a little bit? And based on those things, those are potential to turn the market around. So those are the things that we want to watch. CPI, jobless data, what the Fed says with the FOMC minutes, tariffs, and knowing that anything can change at any moment. So it really is highly volatile. These markets, right? Never put in more than you can afford to lose. But I do think that watching over the next few days, even though this daily candle is ugly for Bitcoin, if it can sustain, I do think that we're not going to go really much lower if we do. The most of the leg of the downtrend has already been put in. And that's what you want to know as far as when it comes to markets and these pullbacks, 30%, 35% is the norm. And if you're looking to, if I were in Bitcoin or if I were in crypto and I was looking to sell now, that's something that I wouldn't do, because the risk reward of holding that asset, especially with Bitcoin, and losing more money on it, because we know it's not going to zero, but compared to what you can make off of it is greatly different. The risk reward, risk of buying here at the 70K mark to 75K to 80K, the reward is just good. And so that's my personal opinion. And if you look at the data, and we'll look at that too, we'll look this week at data that shows that whenever the stock market drops back is quick and is pulled back and as hard as it has, typically in 1 month and 6 months and a year out, it's always green when it does this type of thing. So just understand that the market is going to be primed to bounce. And even for some reason, if things get crazy again with tariffs and it does go lower from here, the market, you have mean reversion, meaning that eventually the market is going to correct somewhat to the upside. You're going to have bounces there. Now, the last thing I want to say is this, is that BlackRock CEO Larry Fink is talking about a recession. And you're seeing other people talk about a recession right now, especially these hedge funds. And so for me, it's a clear sign that we're close to the bottom anyway, because you don't hear about recessions. You don't hear about this at the top. You hear nothing but things are good, buy, buy, buy. And a lot of times with the media and with these giant funds, they're just looking for exit liquidity. I don't care if it's stocks or Bitcoin or anything. They're all markets. They all move up and down, right? Buy, sell, buy, sell. But overall, when you start to hear this coming out of people who control a lot of assets overall, my take is that we're close to a bottom, if not already bottomed as is. So yes, talk about a recession. The stock market can go up during a recession, right? Anything can happen as far as these risk assets. And we know that Bitcoin is some of the hardest money out there. And regardless of recession or good times or not, that it's just overall just been doing really well. And we know that if the Fed does truly cut rates because inflation is down, as we have the high probability of a rate cut by June, that more liquidity is going to flow into the market and prices are going to go up for Bitcoin, for crypto, and for stocks. So that's a great thing to understand. Right now, as far as risk reward, it's a great time to be, for me personally, not financial advice, to be a little bit more risk on and start to slowly dollar cost average in when it comes to these risk on assets. All right. So with that said, we'll go ahead, and if you have not yet subscribed, make sure to go ahead and do that as always, because I do like to give away Bitcoin to not one Bitcoin, but $100 of Bitcoin weekly, monthly, at times to one subscriber who comments on the videos. So make sure that you do those below. Understand that I'm going to have more videos out that are more evergreen, that gives tips and strategies and overviews that you can watch for a very long time. I'm also going to give out videos, make videos like this, where it's more like weekly updates, what's going on in the market, what you need to watch for, price levels I'm looking at. Is it a good time? Is it a bad time in the market? Those are the types of videos I also want to make, because I feel like those are the types of videos that people want to know, because they want to know, what do I need to do right now? And of course, I'll have those out for you here in the coming week and days as we talk about these big events that are going to come out this week with CPI and job data. All right, guys. So that's my thoughts. I'll see you soon. We'll talk about these big events, and if any major changes happen in the market, I'll make sure to jump on and make another video. So with that said, you guys have a great day, trade safe, and I'll see you on the next one.